Hello, and welcome to our series, Career Resilience, where we talk with people about their career path and their career journey. Maybe we can all learn from each other. My name is Jan Daniluk, and I'm a human resources professional in London, Ontario, Canada. I work with Ford Keast LLP, and I work with my clients to help them with the HR side of their business. We hope that you will enjoy these discussions with real people about real challenges and real working life situations. Welcome. My guest today is Michelle Young. I'm so excited, Michelle, to have an opportunity to chat with you today.
I'm thrilled to be here. So I just want to say thank you very much for extending the invitation because I love to talk, so this will be fun. But I love what you've created, and just to be a part of it is very exciting.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Michelle. I really appreciate that. So I have my questions here for you, and we're going to talk about a few things. First of all, we're going to talk about your role at Children's Aid Society and also some of the background that helped you achieve that position. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a Black woman in Canada. And we're also going to talk about career resilience. And you have some interesting things to say there, which I think are going to be so helpful to people that aren't quite sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I think that that's a great tack for us to take. So let's start, Michelle, with your current role. Can you describe what your role is right now?
So right now, I think I'm going into year 2 this spring. I am one of the service directors at the Children's Aid Society. So we have an executive director, a senior director, and then there are 4 of us that make up as directors. And under that portfolio, I have 6 teams ongoing. So once a family's involved with us, they might require ongoing support. So I have supervisors who report to me. I also have 3 Indigenous teams that make up our Indigenous unit that specifically work with Indigenous communities, and even more specifically to 3 local bands that are in our area. And then I also have the equity portfolio that I brought from my previous role as the project manager of diversity and anti-oppression. And so I'm passionate about that. I'm very fortunate to be able to do all of that. And then just being part of the senior executive team. So decisions, strategic planning, all of those things that go into that role.
It sounds like such a busy desk.
Oh, well, yes, if you looked at my home desk, it's pretty busy. That's one of my things, is trying to really be able to organize all that, because they're different portfolios, different things within the portfolios, and different issues to tackle within that. So one of our huge initiatives provincially, it's a program called One Vision, One Voice, and it's to address anti-Black racism within child welfare that has resulted in disproportionality and disparity for Black families. And regardless of what city you're in, it's across Canada. So really trying to address that. So there's a plan laid out. So a huge piece of our equity plan that we're putting together has to address that, along with truth and reconciliation with regards to Indigenous peoples.
What is the most challenging aspect of what you do?
Right now, I think the most challenging is to really get, I think, leadership, and that means supervisors, directors, because it has to come from sort of the top down. So how are directors modeling this, demonstrating this, living this, when we talk about equity, to do that for their staff? And then sort of along we go down the line as far as supervisors, because to me, supervisors are the crux of equity moving forward in our agency or not. And it's a heavy thing for them to carry, but really that they do the day-to-day. So they have a closer contact than I would to the families. So how are they working with their staff at addressing these issues and trying to work differently? Because really what we're demanding and needing is that we operate and practice in a different way, because the way that we have the system is inherently racist and oppressive. And that's hard, I think, for people to hear, when most of the people in our office would be social workers.
Yes.
So, you came into this to be helpful, to combat racism, anti-oppression, social justice, but you also operated and were reared in a system that is oppressive.
Okay, I understand that. Now, what is your background that you grew into this role that you're in, Michelle?
If you're talking about in child welfare,
Yes.
this wasn't the plan. Um, Social work actually wasn't the plan. So if we even go back farther. So when people say I'm not on the right track, I'm like, you're on a track. And so you got to figure out what can you pull from that? What are you learning? What's your passion? I ended up in social work because of a prof who I took an elective, and he said, you should consider this. And I said, because I was a psych major, love psych. I was interested in also business and things like that, but really love psych and sociology. And I said, I don't think this is for me. And so I took to it because you could focus on policy, you could do counseling, you could do social justice. There's various places and spaces that you could work in and have those skills. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a fit.
Yeah.
And so then I went and did that and did my undergrad in psych, then BSW, Bachelor of Social Work, and then moved to Toronto. And at that point, in 96, it didn't seem like anybody was hiring social workers. So I ended up in the private sector working at call center. And my thing is always, I have to leave in a better position than where I started. So I was, it was the call center on the phones, which is not what I signed up for. But living in Toronto, making $10 an hour, it wasn't a lot back then. So don't kid yourself, anybody who's listening. It's not a lot of money now, and it wasn't a lot of money then. But at that point, it was in a training and saw someone doing the training and thought, I could do that. And you're not doing a very good job, but I think I could do it better. So fast forward 7 months, I ended up being in that role and enjoyed it and loved it. And saw the importance of my identity in that space because the majority of people who were on the phones were people of color. Majority were Black, brown. And the agency was hiring because they had different contracts. So they needed at one point Spanish speaking people. They needed people who spoke different Indian languages. And so being in that space and seeing people walk in to this huge office building, coming to the floor that we were on, and being greeted by the white receptionists and everything else, I could see that there was a calm that came over them when they saw me. So at the time, I had like a bald head, I had my suit on. Sometimes my head was wrapped with African fabric. And just to see that and people would say, it made a difference when I walked in.
Yes. Yeah.
And then also Black people saying, I'm proud of what you're doing, in a
Mhm.
sense that you're up there, you're wearing your suit, you're well articulate, you know your stuff, but that also creates a space that we think that we're welcome and also
Yeah.
lets us know
Yeah.
that what we can achieve. So that to me, and I was young back then, was huge. And it meant a lot to get that kind of feedback from people because
Right.
I
So when
believed
did you
it.
become a social worker?
And then I thought, okay, things aren't moving right now in this agency because I wanted to move into a different aspect of the corporate training, and I love that. And I thought, well, I always made a goal to go back and do my master's by the time I was 30, so I should probably do something in social work. So I ended up going to the YWCA in Toronto, and they had a pre-employment program for women. So women who were new to the country, women who had been out of the
Mhm.
workforce, never entered the workforce, women who needed to complete their GEDs. And so I was the intake outreach worker. So I got to go out into the community and bring people in, tell them about the programs. And once they were there, I was the one who did the intake. So that was a lot of fun. So did a presentation, did one-on-one with them, and got to really connect with the people who are running the programs and the teachers.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that was obviously predominantly
Yeah.
women-led environment. And so that was interesting from being in the team that I worked with prior to that corporate was I worked with predominantly men on my team. And so that was interesting. So I made the goal to go back before I was 30 to do my master's. And so I did that, applied to just two schools. So I'm like, I have to stay in Toronto because I'm here. So I applied, got accepted. So I ended up going to U of T. So I actually took time off, well, quit my job, went to school, finished, and knew that I had enough money to take me from April until mid-June. And so that's when I, had the freedom to think, okay, what kind of job? What do I like? What are
Yeah.
my passions? And then did secure a job, but then realized, okay, you've incurred more debt. You actually need a job that pays more. So then at the beginning of June, I sent out resumes and whatnot to Children's Aid. having never worked at Children's Aid, never did a placement, and then got both offers and took the one in Scarborough. So I ended up working at Children's Aid Toronto for 2 years. And then when my husband and I, at the time we were dating, whatnot, got engaged, he was back in London, it made sense for me to move. And then I applied for Children's Aid in London. For me, what I really liked was I did the ongoing, I worked with the young teens and the pregnancy homes when I was in Toronto. When I came to London, I did invest into intake. So really being able to see how can I do, like in a short, I always thought this is like brief therapy. So once we get sort of the protection stuff addressed, there's other things happening here that lead to the protection stuff. So being able to then put on that hat and do the social work stuff.
Yes.
Not just be a child protection worker. And that was, I love that because I don't have to spend hours and days with you. We don't have to transfer your file. There's stuff that we can do and be very intentional in that will get you the resources and connect you where you need to be connected. So from there, I went to the resource department. So that consists of our foster and adoptive families. Now we also have kinship that falls under that. So I worked with adoptive families. So again, how race and different things play into it when you have children being placed with families who are not racial or cultural matches.
Yeah.
And challenging the system and challenging workers and challenging the families that it does matter that this child is of a different race.
Let's move into talking about racism. And you personally, have you dealt personally with racism?
Yes. So I think, a lot of it is also unconscious stuff that happens, but I can go back to when we went back to my first job when I went to Toronto, working in the private and corporate sector. And I remember at the time I started there, I had a bald head and I let it grow a bit and I had, doing little twists and things with it. And I remember the person who I worked with as well, because we fell under the HR department for training. And she came to me and she said, I have to talk to you about something. And I said, okay. And she said, it's about your hair. And in my head, I thought, even at 27, 28, I said, you have no idea what thin ice you are treading on right now. But let's have the conversation. So she said that there was concerns mentioned to her and about my hair. And because I knew the dynamics of who was connected with who, I knew who above her expressed the concern, and it was a Black male. And she was white, the unfortunate person who had to bring this to me. And so I listened and I said, okay. I said, is my hair neat and tidy? And she said, yes. I said, is it clean? Yes. In what way? Because if I let my hair grow, it will not be straight because I'm a Black woman with 2 Black parents. So you're not going to get these nice little coils what you would think so. And so as I went through and I said, and when I come to work, how am I dressed? Well, you have your suit on. I wear a suit every day. Okay. And when I do my presentations and I run my groups and assist in who we hire, are there any concerns about that? She said, no. I said, so we're not comfortable is what it sounds like with my hairstyle. Also in an agency that's predominantly of people of different backgrounds and cultures. She said, yes. I said, this conversation is going to end now.
I have to ask you, Michelle, what was the underlying issue that somebody felt it affected your job performance?
Well, it wasn't about affecting my job performance. I think it was their interpretation and wanting to lean more to whiteness and what is comfortable for what that looks like. So I think it's in California, they finally put a law, and I can't remember what the law is, because even to this day, that is an issue. So a Black woman who had braids and someone felt it was offensive. It didn't look professional. And so that just recently I saw something on Facebook that someone's professionalism was being questioned because she had an afro. So if I let my hair grow, Jan, it's going to be an afro. You let your hair grow, it will be long and straight.
Well, not really, Michelle, but
okay, little kinks in it.
I'm just trying to understand how that,
So, but that goes back to that. Actually, if we go back to, and didn't think you wanted a history lesson, but that goes back
no,
to slavery. So the slave master women would have to cover their hair because these hairstyles and things were not things that they were comfortable with. So you go and basically steal people from a continent and you bring them here to your white world. These are things that they found offensive and wanted to change. And so as time rolls on and this isn't a judgment on Black women who choose to straighten her hair, but there is a pressure to do that, right? To assimilate
yes, okay.
as much as you
Yes,
can. So you fry your scalp to straighten your hair and take it out of its natural state. And there are some who do it because that's a preference. And so it's not a judgment on that.
yes.
But if it only truly is just a preference and there isn't the underlying subconscious, unconscious racism in there, and even people who are Black not understanding where that comes from
Mhm.
because their parents wanted them to not have to deal with. This will be one less thing,
Yes, one less thing.
right?
Yeah.
One less thing. So that just gets passed down and sometimes people don't question that. But then when someone steps up and says, well, I'm going to wear my hair natural, you think about it, wearing an afro at the late 60s was a revolution.
Okay.
Black power, you're thinking, I'm just wearing my hair.
Yes.
And yet it's a political statement. So even in 2021, you're seeing Black children going to school, being sent home. This doesn't fit with the dress code. This doesn't fit with the grooming code. Well, of who?
Okay.
You're comparing it to written this for a white child, not taking it into any context, anyone else that falls out of that norm, and made it sort of law. And then people just think, well, this is the way it should be, and this is the way. So the child who comes in with dreads,
Okay.
that's clean. That's clean. It's tidy. What's the problem?
Okay, so now I want to go over into white fragility. You had mentioned
Mm.
white fragility, and I find that a fascinating pair of words. So can you speak to white fragility? Does that somehow relate to what you were just talking about?
Oh, absolutely. So, white fragility was a term coined by Robin DiAngelo. She's a white woman in the States and has done like this is basically this pool that she swims in. This is the work that she does. And she coined that term because when early on in her career, when she left university and in the state that she was in, there was sort of I don't know if there was a lawsuit that came into play that now every government agency and agencies needed to have diversity training, is what they called it. So she thought, I can do this. And she will actually say, like, I can do this. I'm a vegetarian. Of course, I'm not racist. Right. So she went into it very naive and thinking, and then was partnered with a woman who was Black, and seeing how going to these spaces that were predominantly white and hearing a lot of times predominantly white men saying, we're being discriminated against, we can't get jobs. And she's looking around the room thinking, there's 30 of you in the room, you're predominantly white men, there's one person of color. How is that even like your stats right here are skewed in the other direction? And then she would see common reactions that would come up when white people were tasked with having to talk about race, and how uninformed and just not having that competency, that comfort, or having that in their daily conversation, and not understanding privilege and all of those things. So so it was really, the fragility is that inability or that level of discomfort in talking about race, and how that comes out. That comes out through shutting down people. Or if I come to you and say, Jan, I think what happened over here, like, I know, like, what happened was race. And you go, no, Michelle, are you sure? Are you sure? So-and-so is not racist. They're so nice. So-and-so is kind. So-and-so has 2 Black children that they adopted. They can't be racist. And not realizing that you can have these behaviors that play out regardless of who is in your life. And whenever there's the opportunity, or I would say the challenge of having to talk about race, that the white person, there's different things that happen internally and externally to shut down that conversation, to silence the conversation, and not really understand what that discomfort comes from. So she's actually written a book. And what I do love about Robin is that she puts herself in there and she calls it out.
Yes.
And she's very open about the mistakes that she's made and that she will continue to make mistakes. And so that book in particular is one that our agency is focusing on, especially for senior leadership right now, to because to me, you can't have a conversation about race if you don't understand that your identity is actually not neutral. And the way that our society, it's white supremacy. And I'm not saying that everyone's running around with a hood on their head. We've seen that you don't need to be doing that. But that is the foundation of how Canada and the US were founded. They're founded on slavery. We're founded on the genocide of Indigenous peoples, and laws and things that came into play and actions about where people can live is based on that.
Mhm.
And that has also allowed who gets to write the books, who writes history.
Yes.
You know, in the first part of the pandemic, my son's 9, and I'm glad that they're doing remote learning, like actual remote learning. So I'm with this teacher because before we were supposed to teach, not my forte. Older people, yes. If you want to talk about equity, I can talk equity to 9 and 6-year-olds. I can do that all day. But then when we talked about the pioneers, he was in grade 3 last year, and he said to me, I said, look through the books. And we flipped through it. And he said, I said, what do you see? What don't you see? And he said, well, we're the indigenous people. He said, why is everybody white? And I said, okay. And I said, well, what happened to them? He said, well, they killed them off. I said, well, what's your book telling you they did? Well, they settled and they got, pretty much they got along.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just who gets to write that? So white people can go through life not having real conversations about race.
But let me ask you this, Michelle. When I was a kid in school, we had our English book was English stories. So it was
Yes.
all stories that we would read and discuss and so on. And the name of the book was Man and His World. And I remember saying to my mom, like, why is it Man and His World?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she said, well, because man is just the generic thing that we say. We say man in his world. And, that sat well with me because my mom said it to me, right? So, oh, okay, that's just the general thing that we say, right? And then, of course, because I've been around for quite a while, I lived through the whole, well, it's not a manhole anymore. It's a person hole. Is that what you'd like it to be? The thing in the street.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do know.
You guys do that? Like, and and so it goes this horribly swinging way, and then it becomes, listen, you wanted it all, take it all and see how you can manage that. So do you find, and this is where this long-winded thing is coming to, is are women more, sorry, are women less racist than men?
No.
Because
No.
so help me with that.
They aren't. And okay, so I'll go back to the manhole. So I think like language matters, words matter.
Yes.
If I'm excluded in that, that matters. So I do, if we have to call the manhole something else, then we will call it something else because it was only a man that went into that hole. That's why you got to call it that.
Yep.
But now we have women who are doing all of those jobs and all of those different professions. So it does matter. So if I know that that's a manhole, like there's something has to happen in your subconscious to question if I'm a woman. So I just love that you question that because I mean, that's how I grew up, questioning everything. And my mother she would always try to give like a fair, or if she didn't know, but there wasn't this, I think automatic to shut it down. It was kind of like, I don't know, even though it's a 6-year-old saying, I don't know. So the question, are women less? No, they're not. And that came about when you talk about the women's movement and why Black women like scream from the mountaintops, this is not our movement. You talk about Audre Lorde, you talk about Kimberly Crenshaw, you talk about all of these other women, you talk about Bell Hooks, who question it because that was very much a white middle class woman's movement. I want the ability to go to work. Black women like, I want the ability to stay home if I want. Like, what are you talking about? And you're not looking at what's happening within this movement, that our needs are not also being brought to the forefront. You had the vote. Like if you think about the US, who got the vote? All women did not get the vote at the same time. In Canada, Indigenous people did not get it. Mm-hmm. Right. So when you talk about that, it's really, there is this belief that because women are marginalized in a certain way, but then I always look within those groups. So when people say, why are we talking about race again? Why are we talking about the Black people again? I said, because that's the one conversation you're shy away from, and it's the one that intersects with everything. So as women, am I Black? If I go to the LGBTQS plus community, there is marginalization happening within there. There are hierarchies that happen within that, right? Which brought about, why did Black Lives Matter shut down the Pride Parade in Toronto? People are like, what is their problem? Well, the parade started as a protest years ago. Let's not forget how it started. So to get angry at someone protesting what's happening at the parade is a little concerning, meaning you just thought it was a fun party. I went to Pride in Toronto, love Pride in Toronto, best time ever. But also recognizing when I was there, different groups and different things that happened within that community as well. So I think, do white women get a pass? No. And that's I think sometimes they think because I'm a woman, because I fight for justice, but really look inside. If you haven't looked at your own fragility and how that does play out, and have there been instances where you've talked over a Black woman, or you tried to explain something, or you didn't give space, or you took offense to the Black women that needed to gather and have their own circle. That one always amazes me, that there is a time for that. And some of the issues are different and cannot all fall under that umbrella. So that, like, when people want to go back and read about why was there such a push, because if you think about a Black woman at the time of civil rights, at the time of, the women's movement, all those things still happening, and people saying, you're supposed to be on this side, you're supposed to be on this side. So am I a woman first, am I Black first? And having white women understand that and really understand that. And there'll be lots who will say, like, I didn't get it back then, I didn't get it. And there wasn't space for really looking at the issues that impact, and how, as a woman, you still have the ability to marginalize other women under this supposed umbrella that we're all here together.
Have we come a long way, Michelle? Oh, dear.
Okay, I don't even know. That's an interesting question, because Martin Luther King's, we celebrated his birthday just last Monday, and I have a book here that we read to my son, and it's a children's book, and every year we look at the book, and we have and we haven't, because when his speech still resonates now as opposed to something as a historical piece. When the marching that happened then happened now, I think the difference is there were a lot more white people. There were a lot of people involved, absolutely, in civil rights back in the 60s, but there were a lot more that were involved in 2020. And it took the murder, like, on TV, for people to finally go, oh my gosh, there's still this anti-Black racism that they speak of. It's like global, and not just in the States. When you have the 45th guy down south who got elected, and strongly in reaction, and they call it like the boomerang effect to Barack being elected. Right? So such extremes. And so when people say, look, we elected a Black man, look, we're so progressive. And even the Black man could say, no, you're not. Because this shifted some things, but other things it didn't. And it made those who are against real equity, real social justice, stand even more firm in their positions. And to have, whenever have we ever seen, in this part of like Canada or the US, someone who is able to stand in that office and say such racist things, sexist things, is unreal. So I don't know, like, when you have times of, you really sit and reflect, Martin Luther King, how far have we come? We have come. But then you're thinking, boy, like, when words with James Baldwin and those writers from the time that so in high school, I went to a predominantly white high school, of course. I grew up in London. And this one teacher, I took US history in grade 12, thought, let me take some US history. And he said, have you heard of James Baldwin? I said, no. So this white man with his beard, looked like he probably would have been marching in the 60s. he was the one who introduced me to James Baldwin. And I thought, wow. And then I purposely, whenever I had the opportunity, I had to do an English presentation, the book, you're going to learn about James Baldwin, all you people. This is what we're going to learn about, this Black African American who is gay, who was a civil rights leader in different ways, all these things. So I had to insert it. But just thinking about the things that I read about then, so in that class of U.S. history, we learned about the Black Panthers. We learned about the things that President Kennedy was doing at the time. All of those things in that time and the civil rights movement. I didn't expect that I would actually see this again, that I would live it. So I say to people, like, you've got to really be mindful of how you are walking in this space that we are right now. Because you look back and go, what would I have done? There's a quote. If you ever wonder what you would have done during slavery, during the Holocaust, or during the civil rights movement, you're doing it right now. Mm-hmm. Because at the time, people didn't realize that that was a revolution, that those are the things that were happening, and the choices that they were making had an impact. So that's why I say for people now, regardless of where you are in your sphere of influence, so at work, at home, that all of those things matter. The conversations you're having, the conversations you're shying away from, the conversations that make you uncomfortable, but that you should be having, that's what's going to move us farther along. So that's why I really position White Fragility in the sense of, are there other books? Absolutely. But it's written by a white woman to white people.
It's so complex. And
oh, it is. It is and it isn't. That's the interesting thing.
The thing that I struggle with is that we're all just people. We're all just humans doing our best to make our way through. I mean, that's a big part of the reason for doing this podcast and series, is to say, you know what, you're struggling in your job. Everybody struggles in their job. Here's some ideas that might help you. And I always say, as long as you're kind, as long as, you know, then that's all that matters, right? Just be kind to each other. And but I guess I'm just
kindness isn't enough. Okay. Like, because that does not require you to look inside yourself. That does not require you to challenge your own fragility. That does not require you to challenge the privileges that you've been afforded just because of the color of your skin. That doesn't require you to really look at the murder of George Floyd and think anything but, oh, that was awful. So kindness, and that is something that we talk about that has come forward. The reason people think that is because that was actually like a push, a movement post civil rights, was that, okay, if I don't see color, treat everybody the same. But that's not true. And everybody doesn't have the same historical positioning as you do. So that's actually not true. So you can still be kind and still perpetrate racism and systemic racism. Right? So if you're a social worker and you work with a youth who you're white and you're Black and they come to you for counseling. So Children's Day's decided they need counseling, right? They've got an anger management problem. So let's put him, he's 17, he's a Black male. And he sits down with this counselor. And so during the conversation, he's like, something just doesn't feel right. And he or she never, ever asks them, how does it feel to have a white counselor? Never, ever says, there are things I don't know, so we're going to have to walk through. Never, ever says, have you ever had a Black teacher? Have you experienced racism? What does that look like for you? You're in the home that you're in. Are you reflected in that home? How does that play out? And then the youth decides this isn't working. So they stop going. So then we decide that they are non-compliant, resistant to treatment, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And maybe they're dealing with racialized trauma. Yeah. Because finally people are talking about racism and the impact of people as an actual trauma. If he had come to the hospital beat up, broken bones, that would be easy and we would fix that. But racialized trauma we're just finally, I mean, Bell talks. There are still people in communities that are not comfortable talking about mental health. Well, now people are starting to understand that racialized trauma impacts people's mental health. So someone who you work with day to day, the microaggressions that they experience, and I hate calling them microaggressions because it feels like it minimizes the impact, but the different things, whether it's the job, did I not get it because, did I get it because, like all of these different things, and being silenced in a meeting or never taken seriously, all of those things that impact them, that just being nice is not going to address it, because we'll never have a real conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and then I see movement in people. So that brings me joy.
I think our entire conversation is about resilience. Um, is there something that you've done personally in your own working life that added to your personal resilience? So let's just, you personally, what have you done for yourself?
Um, I mean, the one thing I make sure, and I've always been good, is that I have a good group of people in my camp.
Yeah.
So that's expanded. So I've been very fortunate to have that expand sort of provincially, that there are people who do similar work that I do. And so that's been very helpful, because there have been challenges that others have experienced, and I could get it intellectually and I could be there to support them. But then when I actually have to go through it, so what I think I've done is, there's been some challenges, and just sitting with it. And because I'm very like self-aware and actually do the processing sometimes to a fault, but I will look at a situation and think, okay, Michelle, that's what happened, but what did you put into that?
Mm.
What could you have done differently? What do you own? And the other thing that I've always been is, I get 10% of the time to complain about something, and then I got to cut it, and I make a decision. Is this something you're going to go after? Then you put 90% of that effort into that, as hard as it might be. But you don't get to sit and complain, "Man, I can do that." Like, you don't get to do that. And so that means having to set up and make sure that there are people that I trust to talk about, that will say, okay, you got this. Because there was a situation that happened for me personally, at work, that was very, very hard this past summer, and did a lot of self-reflection on, okay, and then came back with, they're wrong. And now you've got to do what you do. You have to stand up and challenge that status quo. You have to challenge that, regardless of how they might react. Because at the end of the day, I've always said, when you hired me, like, you got the whole package. So I honestly believe that when you hire me, you also wanted my opinion, regardless if you agree with it or not. And I also thought that my job is, in order to make you better, is to challenge that. And I also take that back as well. So for me, for example, helping come up with the equity plan, I don't want to say, hey, Jan, look at this plan. What do you think? And you go, oh, Michelle, it's great. It's lovely. And I'm sitting in my head going, really, really, Jan, there's nothing like you could, I need the critique. So for me, I honestly want you to, because I think if we tear it up,
Yeah.
we will come with a better product in the end. But not everybody is comfortable with that space. And that also comes to talking about equity stuff. If we do this and we get down there in the mud, and you say, well, Michelle, I don't think I'm racist. And I think, well, Jan, you're being nice isn't going to do it. And I go, oh, Michelle, but maybe you're just being too sensitive. And we can have those conversations,
Yeah.
like, openly and honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I will walk away going, okay, I have a better understanding of Jan, and I trust Jan. So even though we are going to make mistakes as we walk forward together, and she's probably going to say something racist again, but she'll be comfortable with the feedback, and I'll be comfortable, and then we'll move and we'll grow. I'm going to say something, and maybe I could have said it differently. She'll point that out. So I think for me, the resilience comes from that. It comes from just when you take stock of what you've done,
Yeah.
like where you've come from and how many different spaces
Yeah.
that I've had to challenge and said, okay, no, I have to keep being me. And I think the resilience comes from if I center what the truth is.
Michelle, you know what? We have to bring this discussion to an
I know.
end. And that's very disappointing, because I think it could go on for quite some time. And, you made me think a little, well, no, you made me think quite a bit, because I think I'm such an inclusive person, and maybe I need to examine that a little bit more and spend some conscious time examining that, because I just think we're all people together. And, but of course, that's just somewhat naive in the point of, we all bring our histories with us too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I'm no different from that, of course. So
No, either am I.
that's going to cause some self-examination and some good thinking and frankly enjoyable thinking.
Hmm.
So I just want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. And we've been talking for a while and it feels like 2 minutes.
I
So
know. I just want to say thank you so much, Jan. This was amazing. And if it causes people who listen to think differently or just say, well, I disagree with her on this. But if you disagree, then I'm comfortable with you like finding out why you disagree.
mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, we
Yeah.
have to move through this together.
Yeah, that's how we grow and develop and step back, and then step forward a bit. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Thank you.
To our listeners and viewers, I hope that you have enjoyed our conversation today. It has been fascinating and so much more to talk about and to think about. And it's just been a pleasure for me to have this opportunity and the opportunity that Career Resilience, this series, offers. Please follow us on YouTube and on wherever you get your podcasts, because that way we can continue to bring you great people like Michelle. So thank you, and until we meet again.